Alrighty, good afternoon and welcome back. I hope you had a good study week. You had some time to either catch up on work or catch up on rest, whatever was most needed for you. In my case, I am not yet caught up on my work and I am nowhere near caught up on my rest. So I'm still working on that, but I should have the first assignment. I have just the last handful of students I'm actually going through. Will be done in the next 2 hours or so, and those will be visible online. They'll be visible on Blackboard with the feedback written directly on your submission itself, which I've showed you how to access for the reflections before, where you can just go to your grades and then you click on the actual grade number and that will open it up in the new sheet. You can again click on your graded number and that'll open up your actual submission along with any feedback I gave. And I've written it directly on the paper this time. And I'm deciding that for the second assignment, which by the way, reminder is due tonight, I'm giving a little more general feedback, a little less feedback, just to get through them more quickly, because wow, does it take long to mark 70 students. So with that being said, there's a couple things I wanted to cover today. I want to go over some general feedback for assignment 1. You'll get those grades back later today. As I mentioned, everyone is hidden until I mark them all. So in case I notice something that needs to be changed, I don't have to go through and then, drop someone's grade because I decided this wasn't done right. So that'll go up a little bit later today. We'll talk some general feedback and then I'll basically take some questions about upcoming assignments. Now, there was one question asked before this tutorial session started on the second assignment. So I figure one thing I could do is maybe get some of those questions out of the way now while we're here and then go into general feedback for assignment 1, because I think a lot of people might be wanting to get that general question answered for assignment 2 so they can work on it and hand it in tonight. So I want to give that priority. Now, just before the session started, there's a question asking how many different fitness assessments do you need to choose for the second assignment? And let me just open up the second assignment over here so I can actually refer to this directly. And let me go back to Zoom and let me share my screen and make it full screen. I'll zoom in a little bit as well. So as mentioned, this was made due tonight instead. Now, my goal was to get the assignment 1 feedback to everyone before this one was actually due, which is not quite done because I have a few left, but I've already given the feedback to you in the past 2 announcements. The only critical feedback I've had so far, like literally the only real critical feedback, is either not answering every part of the question, which is just an exercise in looking at a question as written. For example, if I scroll into here and we look at question 4, it says briefly describe any equipment, partners, or preparation needed and why they're needed. Then it also says, also describe any safety concerns for this assessment. So 2 clear categories worth 2 marks. Similar thing, if you want to describe your actual assessment, let's say you're doing the single rep weightlifting, you want to describe how the assessment works. In other words, what are the main steps for the assessment? That was a terrible underlining. So you want to say, like, how do you actually do the assessment? And how does this assessment measure the specific aspect of physical fitness you identified? For instance, if you're doing the 1 rep maximum, well, you're talking about how you actually do the assessment. And it says there's a couple different assessments they actually do for that. Depending on which one you pick, you're either lifting the maximum weight you can and just recording it, which is relatively simple, but perhaps dangerous to someone, or you're doing another one where you're keeping track of your repetitions of smaller weights and you're looking up a table and you're seeing what your estimated maximum weight single rep value is. So depending on what you chose, You're just telling me, okay, this is how you do the assessment. You lift one weight as heavy as you can, or you lift multiple weights, you look up this table, and you find your 1 RM estimated value. And how does it measure these things? Well, that specific example is an example of your 1 rep maximum strength. So it's looking at the maximum weight you could possibly lift using your arm muscles. In this case, the 1 rep maximum strength is a measure of muscular strength. Your textbook makes a distinction between, when I said distinction, because it had such nice alliteration on my tongue, I realized I forgot to turn on the subtitles. Let me turn those on. Live transcript, here we go. So it makes a nice distinction between strength and endurance. And remember that the strength is the sort of maximum effort you can do in one motion. So you're looking at either lifting something or, squeezing something or exerting some strength against a massive resistance, some sort of a weight or something. And they compare that with endurance. Endurance is the ability to do a slightly lesser amount of work, but for an extended period of time. You can think of it as either lifting the heaviest weight possible and then you're just done, your arms are weak and tired, or lifting smaller weights, 30 times in a row. You're looking at strength versus endurance. So in that case, because it's measuring the maximum strength you can possibly lift, you're describing how it measures strength rather than endurance. So this is something that students often struggle on, is just making sure that you answer all parts of the question. And since I teach a lot of first semester courses, and as I mentioned a little while ago, one of the skills that we emphasize is making sure you read a question carefully and answer each part. That's how I mark. That's what I'm looking for. I'm looking to make sure you gave the main steps and you measured or told me how they measure physical fitness. And since each of those includes a little bit of writing, it's worth 4 marks in total, 2 for each. So make sure you look at everything and answer all parts of the questions. Now, as I was mentioning, there was a question just before class basically asking something about this assignment. And the question was, how many different exercises do you need to choose to do this assignment properly? Because you'll see that there's 3 different labs that are attached. One of them is split into 2 categories. Chapter 4 has labs on muscular strength and muscular endurance, which we just talked about. Whereas lab 3 is all about cardiorespiratory endurance. Strength isn't a big thing there. It's not like you're using your heart to, crush anything. Usually if you have relationships like I do, you have your heart crushed by something else. In this case, cardiorespiratory endurance is your ability for your heart to last a long time when you're running and stuff. And finally, chapter 5 is all about flexibility and how flexibility can contribute to your health long term. So once you've decided whatever you're most interested in, you're choosing one of the physical assessments within that lab. And some of them are relatively simple and straightforward. So to answer all the questions in the assignment, you might find yourself thinking, I don't have quite enough information because I chose, for example, the range of hip motion, one of the flexibility assessments. But later on in the assignment, it asks me a question. For example, for question 5, do the assessment yourself. Based on your results, what are 2 specific advantages or challenges, there should be an S there, you might face regarding your health as a result of your current assessment? Well, in this case, you might think of maybe one of the benefits or one of the challenges if you had bad hip motion and you write about it, but you're told you should have 2 specific advantages or 2 specific challenges. So you can't think of another thing for hip motion, then maybe you write about another specific advantage or challenge related to your arm flexibility. So if you find yourself needing to use 2 different assessments to answer a question fully, that's fine. And that's more likely with some of the assessments like the flexibility that are a little bit simpler and more straightforward. Whereas a lot of the other assessments have plenty of steps and stages involved, and they're using large muscle groups, and you probably have a little bit more written about it in the textbook or online, so you can answer it fully based on the one assessment. Now, I wasn't sure if there was any sort of additional follow-up question to that, but basically you're choosing enough that lets you answer the question fully. In most cases, one of the assessments will do fine. If you're finding yourself struggling, throw in another assessment. That'll be okay. For questions 3 and 4, you really only need to describe the one assessment anyway. So if you add a second one later on, you can just make a mention in your answer that there's another assessment, and it measures your arm mobility or flexibility, and this has the following advantages or challenges. So you don't have to describe all the assessments. If you've done, that's totally fine. Focus on just one for these questions. It may not be 100% clear, but I'm hoping at least it helped clarify a few things.
Yes, it certainly did.
Okay, good. I'm glad to hear that. So I'm going to keep my chat open. Yeah.
I was so much confused that we have to perform all the activities and then we have to write
No.
all these answers of the
So I'm
questions.
sure that I think a couple of people might have interpreted as choose one of the labs and then do the assessments, which is way too much work.
Yeah.
And especially if you're actually doing the assessment yourself, in which case, great, I'm proud of you. But I did promise everyone at the beginning of this term that I wasn't going to actually make anyone do a physical assessment, because you don't necessarily have the equipment for it. And that would create problems if you're not physically able to do the assessment, which is where
Yeah,
the
and some of the assessments also ask to have some equipment,
exactly. And
and not sure what equipment needs to be we need to have and how to measure them actually. That's nice.
exactly.
It's so nice of you actually. You've been very, very lenient and very helpful in answering all the questions and
Mhm.
making it easier to answer the assignments.
Yeah, and the reason for that is not because I'm a nice guy or anything, but I do want to assess on our knowledge of the things. Honestly, when I was in school, going back however many decades ago that was, yikes. I hated gym class. I hated gym class because while I had fun playing games and stuff, a large part of my grade came from my ability to run a mile in under 10 minutes and do all these physical things. And
Hmm.
as a result, I was never physically very fit. I later on found out that it's because I also had two hernias. I had all kinds of like old man problems when I was a kid. And I was a trumpet player. So that involves a lot of breathing and putting pressure, and that
Yeah.
constantly made pain. Now, as a result of that, I don't want any assessment to be based on our actual physical ability, but rather our understanding and sort of analysis of the knowledge needed for that. Which is why maybe I do this differently than previous professors do, where they actually were able to bring us into a gym and do some things. But for the pandemic, we're locked in at home, not really anymore, but we are limited. So I didn't want to require anything like that. Now, that actually leads to the last part of the assignment. Just as a reminder, if you're thinking about these things, access to equipment, access to be able to do it safely, to be able to do it with the resources or money you have, and to be able to do it with your own level of physical ability and physical fitness. That's where these last two questions that are really important to me are relating to ableism and relating to accessibility and resources. That's why the last two questions are asking you about any sort of either physical disability or lack of resources that could make these exercises more challenging for someone, and then trying to look up alternatives that can help them do these exercises. If you read your textbook, they'll give you a lot of descriptions of, well, you don't always have to have a big expensive gym in order to lift weights. They say if you live by a river, go look for a large rock and lift it. And then they give you some sort of ideas there. So there's a lot of possible answers for this without even needing to leave your textbook, although you are welcome to get outside resources if you want. Just make sure you give a basic attempt at citing any sort of external website. Now, I don't want to take too much longer talking about this assignment because I kind of went over it in a little bit of detail the other time, but let me just see if anyone had any quick questions about this assignment. And what I'm doing is I realized I forgot to set this up. Any quick questions? So let me just type any quick questions poll, and I'm going to make it very brief. Yes, by microphone, and yes, by chat, and nope. And let me save that and run it. Just to see if there's quick questions about this second assignment, which is due at 11:59 p.m. tonight. So if you haven't started it, you do have some time to get it done. And I do see that there's a microphone question and a chat question. I will answer those right away. But let me just also say that reminder, if you do hand in something late, I take a 5% penalty off per day late, but that means that's still 95%. So never feel you can't hand something in a couple days later. You can still get the vast majority of the marks, and it's definitely worth it. The only time I wouldn't really accept something if it's like weeks late and I've already given back feedback and stuff. Yes, let me answer the question in chat first. When you say one assessment is enough, say push-up assessment, will that be enough? Possibly. So if you're looking at push-ups, you can look at what the exercise is measuring. Is it measuring strength or endurance? If so, what muscle groups is it measuring? If you read the textbook in a little bit more detail, you'll learn about some sort of static exercises as ways of doing similar measurements of your sort of core body strength without requiring the same motions that a push-up can do. So that'll give you some options later. I think you could answer the questions just with the one assessment. But if you do find yourself having a hard time answering all the questions, throw in another one, just talk about it a little bit, introduce it, and then try to answer those questions then. Otherwise, I think it should be pretty okay.
So can I add on? Can I ask another question based on that? Yeah, so
Sure.
when you say the muscle groups for the push-ups, depending on how you keep your hands, it affects the different muscles, right? If you move it closer, you're working the triceps. If you move it wider, you're working the chest more. So
Yeah.
yeah, do you want just a general grip with a general answer, or
You can give a general answer. If you wanted to get more specific, if that helps you to answer the question, for example, if you wanted to look at particular muscle groups and describe the benefits those particular muscle groups have, that might actually be a little bit harder because you'd have to really think about, well, what are the health benefits for this tiny group of muscles versus
yeah.
the overall health benefits? So whatever helps you to answer the question.
Yeah, because body weight movements are more like compound movements, so they work a lot of muscle groups. So yeah, that's
use the one that is going to help you answer the question. I know it's not the perfect answer, but it
okay.
is the answer that will depend on what you're planning on writing about.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
And I'm not sure, there was one other question by microphone. I'm not sure if that was your question or if that was an additional follow-up to the chat question. So if there was another microphone question, feel free to speak up.
Oh, excuse me.
Hello.
Yeah. Actually, yeah, the same question is that I did 1.6 kilometer.
Yes, I have a list over here, the 1.6 kilometer walk test.
Yeah. So is it enough only to?
I think so. If you do the 1.6 kilometer walk test, it's going to give you some information on the interpretation of your results. And then you could go reading back to chapter 2 and chapter 3. Chapter 2 is a general introduction to fitness overall, and it talks about some of the health benefits. And then chapter 3 specifically looks at the health benefits of cardiorespiratory endurance. So all of these are measures of cardiorespiratory endurance. They'll give you a ton of stuff to talk about, definitely. It should be enough.
But actually, my result is at the top line of FAIR.
Okay.
Almost reach the good line. So how I can answer the question, I need to give specific advantage or challenge.
Yeah, so in that case, think of it this way. if you're in a pretty good range and you wanted to compare your measure of, remember, this is a measure of cardiorespiratory endurance, think about what would happen is if you tested very poor, you had very poor cardiorespiratory endurance. You were doing it more like me. You're going to walk down the street and you're going to be out of breath because you haven't been walking for 2 years. In that case, what challenges do I face? Having a relatively weak heart or not being able to get enough oxygen as I'm moving around? What health challenges would it be giving me if I didn't have this kind of cardiorespiratory endurance, which is in turn going to tell you what advantages do you have? Well, I'm able to, do more activities while maintaining my oxygen levels, and I can actually exert myself for longer periods of time. I get less fatigued and stuff. So you have a lot of things you can talk about because you had a pretty good result for cardiorespiratory endurance. In fact, I kind of think this is one of the simpler things to discuss for anyone that's kind of thinking last minute panicky, oh shoot, I got to get this done tonight. There's a lot of relatively obvious benefits for cardiorespiratory endurance. It's also one of the areas that North Americans are weakest in. Our cardiorespiratory endurance is pretty terrible overall with all of our habits. So it would be a good thing to write about if you were kind of hoping to get it done quickly. I think I interrupted you. You had a follow-up question. Maybe.
No problem. Oh, that's all for me. Thank you so much.
Okay. Alrighty. So for this assignment, like I said, I've had a couple that I've looked over already. I haven't marked them yet, but
I have a
yeah,
question.
go ahead.
Sorry.
Yeah.
So, while we complete the exercises in the lab,
Mhm.
it has some follow-up questions. So, do we need to answer those questions before writing the assignment, or is it?
Absolutely not. No. So don't worry about the lab itself. Remember, one good thing before you do any assignment is always just read over the actual assignment to make sure, which I'm pretty sure you did. And then you'll see there's two options. First option, actually do the assessment yourself. Second option is compare what the fit results would be compared with unfit results. So there's no point here where it's telling you have to actually do the assessments and then, fill out all those questions, and they don't account for any of the marks on this page. So no, those are just like with the other reflection we did at the beginning of the term. That was for your own knowledge. Then the actual questions that were being marked are the ones that show up on this assignment.
Okay. Yeah.
Excuse
All right.
me.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, I have another question actually. So the quick question 5. So I need to talk
Yes.
about the result of my assessment, right?
Yes.
Because the result includes some privacy. For example, my age, my sorry.
Yeah.
my weight. So
that's up to you. You can disclose as much as you want, because let me zoom in on this question here, because you did the assessment yourself and you want to answer based on that. Well, how do your results compare? Basically, what you said is that you did it and it was in the good to fair range. If you tell me, is that considered healthy? You could say, well, according to this, it's in the good to fair range. That is what is considered healthy. Don't overdo it. Don't give me any information you don't feel comfortable sharing. Just give the general results. And remember, I literally don't know what anyone looks like. I don't know if anyone's an Olympic athlete. People could lie on here. It doesn't make a difference to me because I care about your understanding of the health benefits that come with it. So absolutely don't disclose anything you don't want to. I do say that in all my classes because some of my classes do involve some personal information where I encourage people to discuss and see other viewpoints. But yeah, you don't have to worry about that. Don't say anything you don't want to. Okay. Or if you're ultimately just totally uncomfortable, if you're like me and you did the assessment and you just feel shame, you could do part B and you could see that what would be a healthy result and an unhealthy result and answer based on that. It asks very similar questions. The only difference is the weighting. I think I have to change one of these things here so that one of them is worth 3. I forgot to update that. But the weighting is a little bit more heavy on the theoretical stuff compared to the actual practical stuff. And it asks slightly different variations of the question. So in a way, you're rewarded 1 mark for doing the assessment yourself, whereas for part B, you're just answering more theoretical questions. So the marks are heavier in that. This should be a 3 is what I'm talking about.
Okay, maybe no problem. Thank you so much.
Yeah, go ahead.
In this question, part 1A, part 1, it states how do your results compare with the reference results given? What are the reference results we are referring to?
So let me open one of the labs, and
Yeah.
I'm not 100% certain if all the labs have this. I'm just going to stop sharing temporarily until I open up the other lab. And I have that over here. And I'm opening up cardiorespiratory endurance just because it's the one I have open. And I'm going to share this. So when I say this, for instance, if I look at the 1.6 kilometer walk test, which is the one we were just discussing, it has you do some sort of a walk, and it tells you to calculate your VO2 max into the appropriate place in the chart to give you this measure of, oh wait, how does this work here? Copy this value into the appropriate place in the chart at the end of this lab. So at the end of this lab, there's where's the chart? This is a huge thing. There's a lot of stuff over here. I'm just trying to remember. I did read this over and I know it's here somewhere. Intensity, target heart rate zone. So something like this. This section is where I do hear someone was going to ask a question. Is it related to this, or should I finish talking about this first? Okay, I'm going to quickly finish talking about this. In this case, they are talking about your sort of maximum heart rate, or what kind of a maximum beating of your heart you should get for doing different exercises. And it talks a little bit about relatively healthy levels. So in this case, there's training intensity where you're doing something to get your heart rate up to 50 or 80% of its maximum level. And I think over here, okay, I thought this one did specify what would be a relatively healthy level, but maybe it doesn't. Here, okay, here's something I'm looking for. Sorry for all the zooming and moving around. In this case, this one is giving you your overall healthiness compared to age and compared to your distance for, which one was this one? This is the swim test. No one's probably going to do the swim test, but if you chose this, this is what I mean by the reference results, where they're saying a person in my age range, 30 to 39, that if I'm able to swim above 650 yards, I'm in excellent health. If I'm not able to swim 350 yards, I'm in the needs work category. And so this is the difficulty, is that all these assessments have slightly different kind of ratings. Over here is your VO2 max score. This is what I was looking for. And it has the very poor, poor, fair, good, excellent, superior, divided by gender and by age range. So after you go through these assessments, they calculate your VO2 max. Then you are able to compare it to these sort of standards here. So this is what I mean by the reference values. I just had trouble finding it because it was at the end of lab here, not all the way at the end of the actual document. There was a question, I think someone was speaking, and then I cut them off. No, you don't have to complete any of these charts. You only need enough information to answer the question. So let's say I did this and I calculate that my VO2 max is, oh, let me look at this. And let's say 37. This is for me. Well, I did my assessment, I got 37. And I go look over here. My age range is 30 to 39. And luckily, I didn't get the lowest. I have a value between 36.7 and 40.9, which means I'm in the poor category. this would be what I mean about comparing it to reference values. Based on the chart and based on my result, I have poor cardiorespiratory fitness. That's all I'm asking. So in a way, you're completing the chart, but completing the chart is picking the health category that you fit in.
Thank you.
For sure. Let me pop up the poll again to see if there's any sort of follow-up questions on this, which is good. If you have a question, I guarantee it means about 6 or 7 other people had the exact same question. They just rely on people being brave and speaking up. Yeah, I'll take a look at the question in chat once someone types it. So remember to get this done. As I mentioned, the range was around 500 to 700 words, but I think it's a little bit closer to somewhere around the like 600 to 800 word range after having taken a look at just a couple of them. But I have looked, and people who've answered it in about 700 words have basically gotten 100% based on my kind of looking over it very quickly. So it's definitely possible within this kind of a range, which is not advice for most people, but I do have a couple students, and there's no problem with it, that hand in something like 2,000 page or 2,000 word assignments for like a reflection, because you have a lot to say and you're interested in saying it, but definitely not needed to get 100%. You know, divide your time wisely. This isn't your main program. This is your sort of extra class you're taking for interest's sake. Make sure you focus on your other things. Didn't get to know that says below the age part, but what is the percentage? But the percentage that says below 31, I get age part, but what is the percentage? So I don't think these are percentages. If you're talking about 36.7 to 40.9, for this specific assessment, these are my VO2 max scores. In which case, this is something you want to read about in the textbook. It talks a little bit about this. And it's a measure of your ability to take in oxygen and use oxygen effectively. So as your cardiorespiratory endurance increases, you are getting more oxygen taken into your body with each breath, and your heart is pumping more oxygen throughout your body more effectively. So by building cardiorespiratory endurance, you're able to make use of more oxygen over time. And this is why working on cardiorespiratory endurance helps to fuel the efficiency of your muscles. That's what those numbers are. Okay, so let me stop talking about that. And I do want to switch over just to talk 1 or 2 things about the first assignment, just general feedback. But I wanted to get assignment 2 questions out of the way. If you have another one, feel free to stick around. I'll answer some more later. As mentioned, I am getting assignment 1 back to you in about, let's say, 2 or 3 hours from now. I should finish off the last handful of students. It took way longer than expected, but I'm almost done. Let me talk about that assignment very briefly. I need to escape this, and I have it open here. So this is general feedback. You'll see specific feedback when you open your assignment later tonight. You'll see that next to each part, I have something like 3 out of 3 written, or I'll say 1 out of 2. And then I would have written some notes, and it would say, you forgot this. I'd actually have it typed, but I just have my pen right now. So I'm just actually writing it slowly. You forgot this. That's very creative. Now, when you read my feedback, it's usually very to the point, not because I'm trying to be mean, it's because I'm trying to get through everything. So I try to give positive feedback. Nothing is ever intended as an insult or mean. So if something could be worded or read as something that's like, why didn't you do this? That's not the tone. It's like, why didn't you consider doing this? This is something that could help. So I promise you, I'm not being mean to anybody. It's just I'm getting through these quickly. Now, the charts went great. Almost every chart had full marks, which was good, because you're just basically copying down information and then doing some math. And like I said, I wasn't focusing much on the math. So those were a lot of free marks. And in the end, that would probably change the weighting of things because everyone did pretty much really well on this. But there are a few questions that consistently had trouble. One of them was differences between the manufacturer's calorie count and your calculated calories using the 4-4-9 rule. A lot of people ended up saying yes or no, that their calories were similar or different, but forgot to talk a little bit about what could possibly account. So even if yours matched, you could still answer what could possibly account for any differences. And there's a lot of good ideas. As long as people made an attempt at explaining it with enough detail, I gave the 2 out of 2. But one of the things that is probably biggest is if you look into some of the ingredients, if you compared, for example, avocado oil, and you looked at something like olive oil, and you look up their energy content, avocado oil has actually a lot fewer calories than olive oil. They're not that different. I think avocado oil is somewhere around 120 per tablespoon, and olive oil is like 135 per tablespoon, but there's a difference. And this illustrates a point that not every oil, not every fat, not every protein, and not every sugar has the exact same energy. So even though we use the 4-4-9 rule, it's just an estimate. Depending on the actual protein or oils you use, you might have different results. And the manufacturer knows exactly what kinds of stuff they use, so they might have used different values. Another thing that affects this is they might have used a different method entirely. I think I briefly talked about something called calorimetry, which is the science of taking basically calorimetry, taking a mushed up sample of food, burning it in a container of pure oxygen, which will heat up water surrounding the container, and measuring the temperature change in water. A long drawn out chemical process that lets us measure how much energy is released. In many cases, they're not actually calculating their energy, although they could be. They might just be mushing it up, sticking it into a magic science machine that will tell them the energy. So there's a lot of different reasons that you might have different results. I wasn't looking at people actually knowing them. I was looking at possible reasons, as long as you kind of attempted a guess. So even if you didn't get that, that was usually 1 out of 2, and you still did very well on the assignment. The other item here, this is the most common thing. Would you consider the food you chose as being reasonably healthy or junk food? Please briefly explain your reasoning. Now, something like this that's worth 3 marks, asking you to explain your reasoning means I'm expecting you to give some examples to back up your opinion. And for a class that's something like physiology of fitness, we want to get some specific scientific details. So for instance, if yours has a lot of sodium, you might want to talk about, well, this food has way too much sodium in it. This is bad because sodium is linked to hypertension and causes cardiovascular problems, and give me some sort of specific details backing up your decision that this is junk food. You might also talk about this is healthy. It contains a wide variety of nutrients, as well as vitamins and minerals that are essential for helping biochemical processes in the body, promoting healthy bone growth, that kind of thing. Just give a little bit of detail. That's the sort of biggest area where some marks were lost, is just make sure you actually explain with specific details. The recipe went great. There are some weird recipes you submitted, which is fine. I wanted you to have fun with this, and there's some food I definitely would not eat. I'll leave it at that. But a lot of great recipes I also found through this. So I was basically giving marks for this, and filling out this table went pretty well. You plugged it into the website and you got the values. As long as you copied them down, you did this well, and you got the 3 out of 3 marks. But once again, over here, there are some questions related to specifics. Question 5, as I promised, this is basically free marks. Why'd you choose the recipe? There was a lot of interesting answers. Some people liked it because it was quick and easy to make. Some people were bulking up, so it was a good source of protein. Some people were just trying to pick the most unhealthy thing they could find. That's great. You just told me why you chose it. Question 6 went well, where you're comparing your recipe to the food from the pre-packaged meal. And in the future, I would change this question slightly, but what I was really looking for is, how does something you cook at home compare with something you buy in the store? And in many cases, people were surprised. Either the stuff that they bought in the store was so much more unhealthy than what they cook at home, or they found out that what they're cooking at home is actually more unhealthy than the stuff they bought in the store, which changed some minds when they were thinking, I eat this every day. I thought it was healthy. This is not a health food. It's terrible. So I was looking for comparisons. If you didn't compare, you might have got 1 out of 2, but you want to mention that how your recipe here compared to the first food item in terms of calories, in terms of trans fats, cholesterol, sodium, or in terms of vitamins, minerals, and dietary fiber. So marks were there. And question 7, this is one of those specific things again. Would you recommend the recipe to a friend or family member now that you have the nutritional information? Use the nutritional information you researched as justification for your recommendation with some examples. Is it a good source of vitamins or minerals? Is it incredibly unhealthy? Does it give a balanced set of nutrients? You wanted to talk about these things and give specific details. For instance, if it was a good source of vitamin, what kind of vitamin was a good source of? Why is that vitamin healthy? So I accepted a large range here, and because this was a little less specific than the other one, I was accepting more answers, but I wanted you to explain it with, again, some specific details. It's worth 3 marks, so it's expecting a little bit of an explanation. And finally, the last part of the assignment, again, went really well. For those of you that picked huge recipes for the other table, where I warned you that it would mean more math later on, I winced a little bit as I saw you did a lot of calculations when you had like 30 ingredients, but power to you, that's great. This went well. In some cases, we forgot to kind of write about additional notes. I know it kind of looks like it's this extra thing. I should have maybe made it a little bit clearer here, but I wanted you to write about something that you were surprised by, something that was interesting from the food, which is why I included this box here. I made that worth 1 out of 5, but overall, everyone got 5 out of 5 or 4 out of 5 in this question, so it was a good mark boost. Question 8, did the calories match the total calories listed on the nutrient label? This is where, once again, I don't expect you to actually know why things are different. I just want you to propose why they might be different. As long as you made a reasonable guess, you got 2 out of 2. Now, the biggest thing that I think is a source of error is my fault. And some of you identified this and I gave 2 out of 2, is that I should have worded it so that when you do this table here, you're calculating per serving. I forgot to say this should be per serving rather than the whole recipe. So if you chose a recipe that gave you 4 servings, the nutrient label printed out by the website would have printed it per serving. Whereas if you went through here for the entire recipe, you would have had the calorie count for 4 servings. So I should have had just one more stage where you divided it by the number of servings. So that was something, but as long as you made any attempt at describing why it was different, you got the marks. Finally, part 3, this could have been based on science, nutrition, or personal preference, as long as you gave some sort of an explanation about why you would recommend it or why you would replace a particular ingredient. And you did talk a little bit about why that particular ingredient would make it healthier. This went pretty well as well. Now, I don't really ever talk about averages. The averages were pretty good. I don't think anyone will be particularly unhappy with the mark unless he handed it in very late or incomplete. Aside from that, the next assignment is a little different. Assignment 2, there's fewer marks overall. This was out of 40. Assignment 2 is out of, I can't remember right now, but there's fewer marks for tables and stuff, which were kind of like not free marks, but they were easy marks to grab. So just make sure your writing is answering all the parts of the questions, so that you are going to make sure you did well. There's a couple questions here. 30. Thank you for assignment 2. I thought that number, but I didn't know for sure, so I didn't want to say the wrong number. Let me see if there's any questions about this first assignment. Again, I'll get those marks up for you later this evening. I'm almost done. I have a small handful of students left. And nope, that's the wrong button. There we go. And while I'm running this poll, let me just say the last 2 things. I'm going through reflection 1 that I took forever to mark, and I'm just writing down the names and I'm giving you those marks for that. Like I said, if you introduce yourself, you got those marks, you'll get it for sure. And I added a column for your estimated current grade in the course. Let me show you where to find that while I make it so that people can ask the question that is going to be asked over the microphone. So go ahead, ask the question. I'm just going to open that up in the meantime, and I'll try to answer your question while I get it set up.
This is actually just a question for assignment 2, not assignment 1.
Sure.
But for assignment 2, is it okay if we leave the questions in the the Word document?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So you're saying that if you leave space there and then you answer it there? Yeah, that's
like
fine.
I have
Just
the questions and then the answers are under the questions.
Yeah, that's fine. Just make sure that I can easily see where your answers are. That will be totally fine for me. I'm not too picky about that. My main concern is if people write an essay, but they sort of mix up the arrangement of everything, and I don't know what paragraph is answering what question. That's the hardest thing for me to mark. But if it's, as long as I can clearly tell which sentence belongs with which question, that'll be fine. Okay, let me switch over to my. Yeah, let me switch over to the screen. The very last thing I wanted to say was, if you go to your grades under my grades, there is a column that, oops, is not visible quite yet. Let me stop sharing temporarily so I can make that column visible. I meant to make it visible before class started. And here we go. Let me go back into the preview and share my screen one more time. Perfecto. Okay, if I go back to my grades, there's now this weighted total description at the top, which is just basically your calculated grade so far in the course, where each quiz is worth 5% with the lowest one dropped, where your reflections are worth 4% each, and your assignments are worth 10% each. It's a grade out of the stuff you've completed so far. So you might see something like 82%. That doesn't mean if you stop doing your work right now, you'd have 82% in the course. It just means you have 82% out of all the assignments currently graded so far. As a reminder, next week, Friday, is the last day to drop a course and receive a D and C instead of whatever grade you would get in the course, which means did not complete. This is usually only done in a course where you think it's going to be impossible for you to pass or get a good mark. So you may as well drop it and not actually have it affect your GPA on your transcript. But you should always talk to your professor first to see what their advice is. I think very few students in our class will be thinking about this option, but it is an option there. It does mean we need to have 30% of your grade in by this week, Friday, which is why I had to shuffle some things around and why I'm going to be rushed to get our second assignment marked over this next 2 days, so that you have a good understanding of your standing in the course so that you can make a decision for next week. Let me pop up one last poll for any general questions at all, and we'll see where we go from there. I'll get a little more caffeine. Yeah, and if there's a question in chat, can't see assignment 1. Assignment 1 is currently hidden because I have the last small handful of students to grade. So you won't see assignment 1 until I get them all marked, just in case I noticed there was an error and I need to go back and change everyone's grades. I wanted to make sure it was all done.
Is there anything else important that we're discussing in the class, or can I leave? Permission?
No, you can leave. There is one thing you might be curious about, but it's not that important. There's a private question. This is good for me to know that you can't see the answer key or feedback for quiz 1 or 2. And this appears to be the case, I think, for several students. So I can, if you had a question about that, you can email me. Let me run one more poll because that's actually a good question and I wanted to know this. So if you're sticking around for one more minute, people, I would be eternally grateful for literally the end of time. Let me just make one new poll. And this poll is simple. Have you been able to see the correct answers for quizzes you've submitted? So in other words, have you been able to look at a quiz and see the feedback and have the correct answer marked in green? I'm going to launch this poll. This is a proper. Okay, that's good for me to know. So here's the annoying yes. Oh, now I'm completely lost. For whoever said yes, that you could see the correct answers, if you could send me a private message or an email and you just tell me like what browser you used and how you saw the correct answers, that'll be good. I've had several students tell me they've been unable to see the answer key. When you view the feedback for your quiz, it shows you what answers you got right and what answers you got wrong. And a lot of students say they can't view it, but my settings tell me you should be able to. So I think this is a problem with how Connect does things, and it might be related to the browser being used.
I'm
So
kind of confused of what you're asking.
okay, so that might be the thing. Let me switch my screen back over to the website. And let me go to Connect. I'm going to go to our Connect website. I'm going to temporarily stop sharing because I think when I launch the Connect website, it's going to launch me into the professor mode. And that will accidentally reveal maybe some students' grades and stuff, which I don't intend on doing. Let me just quickly open that. If anyone needs to leave, that's okay. You can take off. I just wanted to get this information mostly for me. I'm going to student preview mode. Here we go. And now I'm going to share my screen again. So what I mean is if you look at an assignment that you've already completed on Connect, so if I go to quiz 1 graded, for example, I should be able to click on this. It's now locked out. I didn't actually complete this because it doesn't let me make a pretend student account, which is really stupid. But what I can see is for a practice quiz, practice for quiz 1, I can click on this blue icon to the right. And when I complete the quiz, it lets me see my answers. Now, let's see if it works this way. I'm going to click continue. I'm just going to pick random answers here as we go through. Sorry, this just takes a second. Non-editable, 0. And this is mostly a problem because it doesn't actually let me simulate a student. So I can't test these things to make sure that they're working. And then I have to click submit. Submit, view results. You should be able to see this for your quizzes after the complete. You should be able to go through it and see, what did I get on this thing? 3 out of 10.
Yeah, you
And
can see that after the practice quizzes and
but not for the quizzes.
No, you can see it after the quizzes as well, I think.
Okay. So that's a thing for everyone. If you can, over the next few days, just double check for me. I'm trying to figure out why some students can't, because my intent was always that you can see which ones you got right and which ones you got wrong. I always give that feedback because it's your right to know that, really. So if you can't see the feedback, I'm going to try to figure it out. I wish it let me make an actual pretend student account so I could test it, but it's a little bit limited. So I'll try to figure that out. That's what I meant by the question. I can't see it after the actual quizzes. Yeah, that's what it seems to be the issue with, because my settings say they give you the answer key. It shows you feedback at the end. I'll try to figure out what's going on there. All I see is
that's
the
the
mark I
same
got.
for me. Sorry. I can't see it after the actual quiz, but you can see it after the practice quiz.
Okay, perfect. I mean, not perfect, but it's good for me to know that it's not just an isolated problem. I'll see if I can figure out why it's doing that. The intent is that you should be able to see the feedback and know if you got it right or wrong. So I want that to be able, because everyone had a randomized question. For each quiz, there's about 160 possible questions, meaning I don't want to make the answer key and show it to every individual student. You should be able to see it yourself. I'll see if I can figure out what's going on there, but I think it's just McGraw-Hill Connect being McGraw-Hill Connect and not working the way I would like it to work. I'll try to figure it out. You will be able to see your answer key one way or another. Okay, well, I've talked for longer than I intended. There was a lot of good questions though, so that's great. If anyone does have another question, you can stick around, but I'm going to end the recording now so that we can all take off and go. I'll try to finish marking the rest of the things in the next 2 hours or so. Aside from that, don't forget to hand in assignment 2, whether it be tonight or a day or 2 late, which is a very small penalty. Good luck finishing up, and remember your third quiz is going to be due on Monday night. And I'm going to get the videos up finally sometime later this week after I got your marking done. Most of you are just going to read the textbook and do the quiz anyway, but I want to at least get something up. Take care, have a great week and weekend, and I will talk to you later. Let me end the recording now.